Sometimes it seems that we know the people around us better than we know ourselves. A neighbor with whom you nod in the mailbox. A colleague who drinks coffee across the street every morning. Even the closest person sleeping next to you on the pillow is the whole world that we take for stable and accessible. But it only takes one detail to fall out of place, and the familiar picture collapses. Betrayal can be hidden behind a quiet smile. $1,000,000 scams behind an ordinary accounting folder. A conspiracy over a family dinner. This story happened in Houston, Texas. Officially, it never received much publicity, short notes in newspapers, a couple of reports on local TV channels, which quickly displaced new sensations. But what happened is still whispered in offices and kitchens. I dug through police reports for a long time, looked through old articles, even found audio recordings of interrogations. And now he has put it all together to show how any inconspicuous person can reach the limit and turn his life and the life around him into a nightmare. The main character was named Daniel Reeves. 38 years old, an accountant at an IT company, married to Melissa, the child's father. At first glance, he was the perfect picture of a middle-class king. A two-story house in a quiet suburb, barbecues on weekends, evening jogs on the neighboring alley. But behind this facade life, a crack opened up, which was widening every day and was about to burst. Daniel had worked at Lantrix Solutions for almost 12 years. Quiet, punctual, inconspicuous. He was not a careerist. Unlike his colleagues, he did not strive for leadership positions. He was satisfied with a stable salary, health insurance, and the opportunity to come home in the evening, where his family was waiting for him. But it was precisely this invisibility that worked against him. In a world where whoever is louder beats me, Reeves became increasingly transparent, even to his own wife. Melissa, on the other hand, always sought attention. She once wanted to become a fitness blogger. She posted photos of her workouts on Instagram, recorded videos about a healthy lifestyle. She had few subscribers, but a sea of ambition. She loved beautiful things, restaurants, noisy companies. She perceived the fact that Daniel did not share her enthusiasm as weakness. Everything changed in 2021 when Michael Hunt entered their lives. Michael was Daniel's colleague in the department, but his complete opposite. Charismatic, self-confident, loved to make an impression. He was friends with the bosses, knew how to joke at the right moment, could charm anyone. Unlike Daniel, Michael often stayed late after work, either for important reports or for hanging out at a bar with colleagues. It was Michael who met Melissa at a corporate party. It would seem that nothing special, a few common words, a couple of jokes. But in their eyes there was immediately a tension that was hard to myth. Daniel pretended not to attach any importance to it. He has always been a person who finds it easier to ignore anxiety than to delve into it. But after a couple of months, anxiety began to return to his life more and more often. I saw printouts of his bank statements. At first, small expenses, new sneakers for $200, dinner at a restaurant that Daniel never visited. Then the amounts grew, $800 for a piece of jewelry, $1,500 for a weekend in Miami. Daniel noticed this, but he convinced himself that Melissa just had a new girlfriend, that she made money blogging. He didn't want to admit the obvious. One evening, when the kids were already asleep, Daniel heard a quiet ringing sound from the bathroom. He looked inside. His wife's phone was lying on the sink. The screen was glowing with a new message. He didn't want to read it, but he read it anyway. The message was from Michael. "You were incredible today. When can we do it again?" And at that moment, as he would later say during interrogation, his entire former self died. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Daniel continued to go to work, bring the kids breakfast, and tend to the lawn. But his gaze had become cold. He no longer looked at his wife the same way. He began saving. Not money, information. I found printouts from his laptop in the case file. Spreadsheets, folders, notes. Daniel kept a veritable chronicle of the betrayal, dates, calls, expenses, even travel routes that he checked against Melissa's phone GPS. He knew everything. But he kept quiet. For almost a year, he pretended nothing was happening. His life became an observation. And then a plan was born in Reeves' head. Daniel was not an impulsive person. His strength always lay in patience. He could wait for hours, days, months. And now this quality became his main weapon. At first, he started with something simple. He installed a hidden surveillance program on Melissa's phone. He knew her every move, every message, every photo. The police report would later state, the program allowed for continuous monitoring for 287 days in a row. This meant that for almost a year he was living not his own life, but someone else's. He soon realized that cheating was just the tip of the iceberg. Michael was not just a lover. He had drawn Melissa into a much more dangerous game. One evening, returning from work, Daniel overheard her conversation on the phone. She was sitting in the kitchen, her voice tense. "No, he won't find out. I said it was for the blog. Yes, I'll translate tomorrow." It was about money. Amounts that had nothing to do with the family budget. Reeves pulled up the bank statements again. Almost $25,000 had disappeared from their account over the past 3 months. And these weren't purchases, but transfers to strange accounts in Nevada and Florida. The deeper he dug, the scarier it became. Michael, along with a couple of friends, were using Melissa as an intermediary in a money laundering scheme. They were cashing out tens of thousands of dollars through her blogger brand, disguising everything as advertising contracts and marketing deals. Daniel realized his wife wasn't just cheating on him. She had become an accomplice to the crime. I read the statements of Daniel's colleagues. No one even suspected that he knew. In the office, he was just as quiet, even smiling at Michael. But hatred was already seething behind that smile. He began collecting evidence. Not for the police, no. Deep down, he knew that he would do justice himself. On his laptop, he created a separate folder called Shadows. He saved everything there, screenshots of correspondence, bank transactions, GPS routes, even photos taken with a hidden camera in a car. The more this folder grew, the less was left of the old Daniel. I found his diary entries in the case. In them, he wrote, "I once thought that betrayal was a knife in the back. But it turned out to be worse, a silent poison that, drop by drop, kills everything inside. She looks at me and smiles, and I know where she was an hour ago. I know what word she whispered to another. It is worse than death. But death is her way out." These lines are like the cry of a man who has had everything taken away. But no one around heard this cry. Meanwhile, Michael's business was on the rise. He was increasingly staying late at work, getting new projects, and even becoming the acting head of the department. Daniel knew that his career advancement was also connected to fraud. Michael transferred company funds to fictitious companies through dummy accounts and prepared documents as if everything was legal. That's when Reeves came up with a plan. He realized that if he simply killed Michael and Melissa, it would be a banal story of jealousy. But if he hit them so hard that they lost everything they had, it would be real revenge. He started small. First, he slipped an anonymous letter to his superiors about dirty operations in the department. But he wrote it in such a way that suspicion fell on other employees. Michael looked clean, and this further strengthened his position. Then Daniel forged several transactions using other people's passwords. He made sure that the documents had Michael's signatures. He also saved these copies in shadows. But this was not enough. He wanted Michael to collapse not only at work, but also in life. During this period, Daniel traveled more and more often on business. In reality, he traveled to an industrial area of Houston, where he rented a small warehouse. There he stored everything he collected: printouts, photos, old phones, even voice recorders with recordings. The FBI report later stated, more than 500 sheets of documents and 46 digital media were found in the 37-square-meter room. All of them contained data personally collected by D. Reeves over a period of 14 months. He built the case as if he were an investigator. But unlike the police, he was not going to arrest anyone. His goal was destruction. By this time, Melissa was almost no longer hiding the affair. She spent nights at a friend's, returned in the morning, and did not even wash off the smell of someone else's cologne. The children began to ask questions. And this was the last straw. One evening, when his son asked, "Dad, is Mommy living with Uncle Michael now?" Daniel knew there was no turning back. Everything he had done up until then was preparation. All that was left was the final act. One cold evening in November 2019, Daniel felt for the first time that he was ready to move from evidence gathering to action. Over the past months, he had become almost fanatical in organizing everything that had to do with Melissa and Michael. But dry files and photos could not satiate his hunger. He needed a game. At first, he started with small psychological attacks. Michael found an anonymous letter in his mailbox. It said, "Your friends will soon find out who you really are. Money will not save you." There was no signature, but inside the envelope was a photo of his car, taken in a motel parking lot. A week later, Melissa received a similar letter. Only her envelope contained a photo of her and Michael holding hands in a cafe, taken from the street through the glass. On the back, someone had written, "Family always sees everything." Melissa became nervous, but Michael waved it off. "That's nonsense. Your husband must be playing detective," he said. He had no idea how right he was. Daniel's next move was what experts would later call subtle reality manipulation. He began making tiny changes to their lives. One day, Melissa came home and noticed that her laptop was on, even though she was sure she'd turned it off. An email from Michael was open on the screen. Another time, Michael found a flash drive on his desktop. It contained only one file, titled lucanfemerer.avi. The video was a montage of hidden camera footage, him leaving his office, getting into a car, entering a hotel. All shot from different angles. He turned pale, but again decided not to panic. "There's probably some psycho following me. But I've got it all under control," he assured Melissa. But his hands were already shaking as he took out the keys. Daniel understood, fear is the foundation. If the enemy is afraid, he loses control. In the diary of those days he wrote, "I must not rush. Fear works like acid, it corrodes from the inside. Let them think every day that they are being watched. Let them go to bed and jump up at every rustle. It is better than any bullet." Meanwhile, the children were increasingly staying with their grandmother. Daniel deliberately made sure that they would not witness what was about to happen. And Melissa and Michael were getting deeper and deeper into their own suspicions. They began to quarrel among themselves. "You do everything sloppily," she screamed. "Because of you, someone is interested in us. It's your husband." Michael snapped. "Do you think he's an idiot?" This was exactly what Daniel wanted. He was turning their union into a source of mutual mistrust. In December, he went further. First, he sent Michael's boss a randomly found file containing documents with forged signatures. Then he added a couple of real transactions conducted by Michael himself. The investigation began unnoticed. The finance department began asking questions, and Michael felt the ground slipping from under his feet. Meanwhile, Melissa received another letter. "Do you think he'll leave his wife for you? He's already planning how to get rid of you first." Inside was a receipt from a jewelry store, a copy made by Daniel. The buyer line had Michael's name on it, and the item description said an engagement ring. But the shipping address was not hers. And that's when all hell broke loose. Melissa became hysterical. She demanded proof from Michael that he wouldn't betray her. He accused her of paranoia in response. The arguments grew louder, the calls more frequent, the tears longer. Meanwhile, Daniel sat quietly in his warehouse, drank coffee from a cheap thermos, and looked through another batch of photos taken from the camera opposite Michael's apartment. Everything was going according to plan. In February 2020, he began preparing the final phase. He bought a Glock 19 pistol on the black market, written off from a police warehouse. He found it through an old friend of his, a former military man, who helped with a silencer. He kept everything in the warehouse, neatly, in an airtight container. He also kept 2 canisters of gasoline and several chains there. The reports later wrote, Reeves' plan included both direct reprisals and elements of staging. By March, he had everything. Documents capable of destroying Michael's career. Photos and videos that destroyed Melissa's reputation. Weapons and means for the finale. Children who were temporarily staying with their grandmother and were out of sight. All he had to do was pull the trigger. And at that moment, as his notes showed, he experienced a strange feeling, calm. "I've been waiting for this for almost 2 years. And now that it's ready, I don't feel angry. Just empty. But maybe empty is freedom." On the night of March 12, 2020, Daniel Reeves put on a dark jacket, black gloves, and left his house through the back door. The wind was damp, the harbinger of a spring storm, and an ambulance siren was wailing in the distance. He walked calmly along the sidewalk, as if he were going to the store for bread. But in his backpack was a Glock, a bundle of chains, and a plastic can of gasoline. Michael's apartment was his first target. Daniel had studied the schedule in advance. On Thursdays, he worked late at work, returning home closer to midnight. But that day, everything went wrong. That evening, sitting in his car nearby, he saw Melissa coming out of the entrance. She was holding a bag and looked nervous. Her steps were fast, almost nervous. Daniel immediately knew this was his chance. He followed her. Melissa got into her black Honda Civic and drove toward an old motel outside the city. Reeves knew the place. It was where their secret meetings had begun. He arrived later, parked on the other side of the road, and waited. 10 minutes later, Michael's silver sedan pulled up to the motel. He got out, looked around as if expecting someone, and headed toward the same room as Melissa. Daniel didn't move. He just took out a camera with a long lens and took a few pictures, Michael opening the door, Melissa waiting inside, their silhouettes merging. These are the very pictures the police would later find in his safe, and they would become one of the pieces of evidence of his manic obsession. He waited for almost an hour. During this time, the lights were on inside, and muffled voices could be heard from the window. Sometimes shadows moved, but otherwise everything was quiet. At exactly 11:47 p.m., Michael came out of the room. He was buttoning his shirt and looked annoyed. Melissa remained inside. This was Daniel's perfect moment. He waited until Michael drove away, and then, as if in a trance, he headed for the door. Melissa jumped when he entered. Before she could say anything, Daniel slammed the door shut and bolted it. "Hi, Mel." His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "It's been a while." Her face went pale. She backed away from the wall. "Daniel, It's not what you think." "Oh, it's exactly what I think." More than that, he took out his camera and placed it on the table. "I've been putting this puzzle together for 2 years. And now it's all done." He spoke calmly, without shouting. He told her about every letter, every photograph, every forged document. He relished the moment when her eyes widened in horror. "You destroyed my family," he said. "And I'm going to destroy your life." Melissa was sobbing, begging for mercy. But he only pulled out his gun. "It won't be quick," he said. "You have to feel what I felt." What happened next is only partially known. The police reports read, the victim was tortured, metal chains and incendiary fluid were used. Signs of arson were found at the scene, but the body was identified by dental records. Daniel left the room to burn and left through the back door. His hooded figure was captured on surveillance camera for only a few seconds, and that was the key to exposing him. And what about Michael? 3 days later, he received an anonymous letter. Inside was a USB drive. It contains a video of Melissa, filmed in her final hours. Part of the footage has been edited to make it appear as if she is begging him. Michael lost his cool. He made a mistake at work that cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. He was eventually fired. A month later, he was found hanged in his garage. When the police raided Daniel's warehouse, they found a veritable archive, photographs, recordings of conversations, lists of dates and names. In the corner was a safe with weapons and documents. But Reeves himself was not there. He was arrested a week later in the woods near the Mississippi River. He lived in a tent, ate canned food, and kept a diary. On the last page was the inscription, "I did what I had to do. The rest is not mine." Reeves' case thundered across the country. Some called him a monster, others, a man driven to madness. The court found him guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and arson. The sentence was life in prison without parole. And to this day, when I review the case file, I wonder, at what point does an ordinary person turn into a predator? When does betrayal become a trigger and love a weapon? That question remains unanswered. But the story of Daniel Reeves is a grim reminder that within each of us there may be a shadow lurking, waiting for its moment. Make sure to hit subscribe and give us a thumbs up, because you won't believe what happens next. And we've got more real-life revenge stories just like this.